Dye, dye, dye. Yep, that's what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about how to dye that piece of leather so that it looks old. Taking brand new stuff, making it look old. Today on Dodson Creates in leather. Check it out. All right, now we are got all the effects on here. We also put our holes in here for the belts to slide through, because the belts aren't permanently affixed to this surface. They actually slide through in these grooves. It just allows for a lot more adjustment, and then you don't have that weird fold over. Because if this was one big long piece of leather, then you'd have this weird fold over right at your belly line, and it sometimes that twists and turns, and this was just a different design. So I've actually just sprayed this with some water to dampen it, and then I added some additional effects. I added some hammer hits on it, and I'm going to spray it again with water. If this is one of the coolest things, it's not a normal spray bottle because it actually will continue to spray a little bit afterwards, but I'm doing this so you can kind of see all the damage that we've added. Okay, so all the stuff kind of sticks out more than others. Okay, and in another tutorial I'll show you how to do these slots without having to have a special tool. They are particularly rough looking, and that is partially intentional, but also partially because I'm going to use this burnishing tool to kind of smooth them out. As much as I'm not really too concerned about the appearance, I do want to make sure that they don't damage anything. I don't know, it's just a little... It's hard not to do the proper finishing techniques on this. But, you know, there you go. That's part of the allure of working with post-apocalyptic stuff. So I've got all this stuff here. I have dampened this for a reason. In fact, I'm probably going to hit it again. And again, this speaks to using the water-based leather dye, because it allows me to blend. Okay, now as with any kind of leather dye, I don't care what kind you're using, remember that your skin is just like leather. It will dye. So if you get dye on it, well, that's gonna be what's happening to you. Now the client specifically asked for a medium to dark brown, so I am going to start with the light brown first. So I want to do an overall coat. So I just want to show you this for a couple reasons, one of which is so that you can kind of see how the effect that you're going to get once you put this on here. I do not suggest, I like using these sponges, and I actually just leave them in plastic bags, and so I don't have to sort of recharge the sponge with dye. And then you just pour it on here, and in this case you just go to town. Okay, now if you can already see, all those scratch marks, all right, are getting pulled out. And one of the reasons I start, in this case, with this sort of project with the lighter dye first is I can fill in all the little weird divots and stuff like that without worrying about the dye getting too dark in any one spot. And this will create a richer color when it comes to actually the finished product. So even though they want a much darker color, this sort of simulates that aged leather, okay, one of the stages, so then when we go to remove a layer of this, especially when we apply some more water to dampen it, it will look good. Because see, when we're doing these areas, if we had to go in with a darker leather dye, it might actually get a little too dark in certain areas. It's not normally a big deal, but again, in something like this, it just kind of gives it a little bit of something extra. And you can see also how the edges get really super dark, because wherever the leather is exposed, the grain of the leather is exposed, it's going to become darker. So you always have to plan for that. And that's the other thing. Now, this particular stuff, this water stain, which comes from Tandy, but it's actually an Italian dye called Fenice. And even though it's really dark in some of these cracks and things, it will lighten up substantially, probably by about half. And because we're not going to put a shiny protective finish on this, we're going to go with a flat color. It won't darken up the color as much. Whenever you're dyeing stuff, if you apply a glossy type of finish, it will tend to darken up that leather a little bit. So now, there we go. You can kind of see just with this, now all that damage, right? In fact, it might be just a tad bit much. Okay. But when we go through with the additional colors, the darker color, it will some of that will not show up as much. But having this lighter basis is really kind of a great way to start to work on this and to kind of give you a good base to work from. Okay, so if I'm happy with all that, I would stop. All right, and then go from there in terms of we're going to go on the next level. I still have to do the back yet, and then I'll show you the next step. All right, so we have this dyed. It's starting to dry a little bit, and of course we did the back. It's important to do the back because it makes this a lot more stable. You won't get as much curling, which in many cases is what you want. In the case of this post-apocalyptic stuff, it might be a little bit more desirable. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to accent some of this, the imperfections in the damage, the battle damage that we've added. I'm going to start with a dark brown. And one of the great things I do like about this product is it's got like a little squirty tube or a squirty top, so you can just put a very small measured amount in there and do what you want to do. Now, I'm going to give this a shot of water, okay, the whole thing, because certain area, what I want to have happen is in some of these areas like this cut, okay, I kind of want some diffusion happening. Okay, I don't want a super defined edge. Okay, because I'm trying to get in deep into that cut that I've created, that fake cut, and then in there where we have the circle, okay, I want to apply some there too, because there was some sort of fastening device there. Okay, so we're trying to duplicate that. There would have been some patina from the metal piece that was there. Okay. And then with it wet like that, if I'm a little too much, I can just sort of wipe it away with my fingers and it makes it really subtle. Okay, this can become much stronger and I can always go back in and do more of it. I also can see areas where maybe I missed, where I didn't get in deeply. We can accentuate those. And, we're going to come in with a darker color yet. So some of this we can be a little less careful. Some of this we can be more careful. And also understand that this is where this whole line here is actually where the belt's going to be. But a lot of times I just can't resist, and it's sort of like a practice thing. And a client will see that, and it's going to become much more, I don't know, just sort of shows the effort that you go in to do that. But anytime that you can just do that extra bit is always important. I'm definitely going to get it around these areas because this is where the belts are going to abrade and rub and darken. So I'm definitely going to hit that more. So I'm using a dark brown, which is basically a couple shades more than the existing one. And then I can use my fingers to sort of smear it around. That's one of the great things about having the gloves on. But I'm darkening some areas because that's just what would happen with this leather. These areas that are right in the middle, I want to make sure I get, because those are the things that you're going to really see. Any of these little cuts and things, I'm going to try to accentuate. And then this is where the paper towels are also valuable. So depending on how you work this, you could do this dry. Okay, so that's going to absorb some of that extra leather, that dye, but it allows the dark part to sink into that groove or that imperfection you made. So it doesn't stay on, not as much of it stays on top. So that will look really nice and distinguished. So you got to remember that a lot of times, especially if you're doing, say, like a photo shoot, these are going to be viewed at a distance. So you're kind of need to, it's almost like theater where you have to sort of over accentuate stuff. Also, in these areas where I have, like, these are those cuts that I did, okay, right there, I can get in here with this and get that dye in there, and then when it closes, and then open it a little bit more, and then that helps make those show up a little bit better where I want them to. And again, this is just something that comes with practice. Okay, and then I've got most of this done as terms of the dark leather. Okay, so now this is still not dark enough for what the client wanted. So we're going to go to the next level, which is the dark brown, okay, or the medium brown. So this also comes in a much larger size bottle. So that's ideal, especially when you're more of an industrial commercial shop. You're going to want that. So I have to use like a bigger sponge. But for broader areas, you're going to want a larger application device. So a bigger sponge is better than a littler sponge when you have a large area you want to do. This is still damp, so I can just start in. Now, you start with circles, and you want to even that out, because this particular product is made to sort of be rubbed into the surface. Okay, and again, it's okay if this isn't real even at first. It's especially okay in terms of this particular build. And it's really amazing how much reddish and lighter this looks than what it does on the screen here. So this looks really much darker than, and not quite as red as it actually is. So that'll set up a little bit. I'll look at it. I'll probably hit these edges some, just to make sure you get that nice coating. I've already dyed the back. I do not need to change the color. You can decide what color you would want that to be. So we let this sit just a little bit, just a few minutes, or not even just a few minutes, just a few seconds, and then we'll go in for the next level. And then this will darken up really a lot more, because now it's just sort of sitting on the top. And then another nice thing about this particular dye, as opposed to the Echo Flow, kind of like the leather dye, regular liquid leather dye from Tandy, and even Phoebing's to a degree, is you don't get any bleed off, really. This just stays the way it is. So now I'd say we're pretty good with our color. Nice, rich color, and part of that is caused, okay, by, part of that we got is just from the fact that we're using multiple color layers of dye. Now it looks a lot orangish or more reddish there than it is, but I really want you to get all the markings and stuff, because when we step back, okay, a lot of that just sort of disappears. Now normally I would do the belts at the same time, but in this particular build it's okay if the dye is just slightly off, and I also want to do it for the brevity of the video. Now the next thing I'm going to want to do is, once again, go in. I'm going to look at any areas that I want to lighten up, or not lighten up, because you really can't lighten anything up, but you can darken certain areas that might need a little bit more additional dark. This is still very wet, so this is the time to kind of do that. So if I, again, wanted to get in there, and maybe I wanted to add some like a stain, right? So you could think of oil or something like that. Well, I can look at an area that might be the source of that, and then I can just start painting that look, because I want that to kind of be there. And I could also, just do some normally blobby things Okay, you don't need to get real particular. Don't overdo this step because it can kind of look stupid. So a couple different options here. I can let that dry and set up a little bit, and then wipe it so it becomes really subtle. If I have a mark that's small, I might just leave it dry on there. Okay, so that mark there will dry a lot less, and then we have this big glob here, right? That's a little, I'm not really feeling that. You can't really remove it as so much, but you could hit it with this water, okay, which is then going to allow you to kind of wipe it, and then it kind of makes it a little more subtle. Okay, so now that dye, that thing that we did that was real obvious is a lot less, and it looks much more natural, like something got spilled on it. You could also do a splatter effect with a much darker thing. We do have black, which we'll probably go in and add a little bit more. 'Cause remember, this is a dark brown, so if you go in with an even darker color, you're going to create a much stronger mark, and you want to be cautious about that. So we are almost to the point of where our last dye color is going to be. Our next step is to apply some dark brown just around the edges, because remember how we talked about how leather tends to darken around the edges. We want to simulate that, so we're going to add dark brown. Okay, so we're going to add dark brown to the edges. So I have a much smaller sponge here. I'm going to actually give the sponge itself a spritz, in part to help make it wetter, in part to reduce a little bit of the amount of dye that's actually on the sponge, because I don't want a full strength amount of dye on here. And then I'm going to pat it a little bit. So you kind of think of this a little bit like a dry brush, because see, I got a really distinct line there, and I really don't want that. So I can, in this case, I can use the flip side of the sponge to help sort of, and in some cases what you're doing is you're creating that seed amount of dye to work with. Remember, your corners, areas of abrasion are going to be darker. Okay. And then I can go back through very quickly and feather that look so that we don't get that really specific line. If you do have too much of that, it just looks kind of fake. It looks like somebody painted it on there. And the idea is you're supposed to make it look like it's naturally occurring. This is also sometimes when it's good to kind of just come along at like an edge, because that natural sponging, that natural sponge technique, only some of it is going to hit. So you get that kind of fuzzy edge, or feathered edge would probably be the best term. Okay, and you can see then how, let's get this reflection out, how we've kind of got that dark edge. It's not a solid edge, but it's definitely there. Okay. And then I'm going to put a streak here in the middle, because this is the part that actually shows. And then I'm going to feather that a little bit. Definitely going to want to hit that with the water so that I can blend it with my paper towel. And again, when this dries, you'll see a lot more of that. And then just continue around that edge. And notice I have not recharged my dye. I put about 3 or 4 drops, maybe 5. I don't know. I put just a few drops on that corner to create that shape. And again, you're just duplicating that edge getting dark. A lot of times I'll actually go back in with black and then do the very, very edge. Okay. Now I can also hit this with a couple drops, do my little, and then just hit it with the sponge. So I'm just tapping it just to put a little bit of dye on there, trying to avoid being too regular, and then I might just and again, this is just, you're trying to create an uneven appearance. Okay, Now, with this still dry, then I might go in, and here's where I might apply some secondary effects to try to see if I can get some of that lighter leather. Now, see how the dye has come away, right? And it's left that lighter scratch there. Okay, there it is. So you might want to apply that in some areas. Be cautious with this because you can sort of overdo it a little bit. But the great thing is you can just always go back in and just fix it. But it kind of adds a little, I think. It's great for doing some of the edges. You could do this around a cut. I don't do it as often, but it's great along these edges. Kind of adds a little bit more stuff. Okay, and remember, when all that moisture gets in there, it will actually fill up some of these things. So like that area that we did that was cracked, you can really see those cracks a lot more now. Even though they're darkened, it swells up a little bit. So at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with what I've got. Okay, so here's kind of the thing, and it's going to look a little bit different once we get to there we go. There we go. It's a little hard here. This is why we're uncut. Okay, so I've got all kinds of colorations. I got marks in it. Now, because this client did not want to have any embellishments on here, they were going to put them on themselves. I did not do some of the stuff I normally would have done. I would have applied a few more, and I'm going to go back in again, even on top of this, but I would have applied probably a few more just to put them around where the rivet holes are, because if I might be adding grommets to this, I want to make sure that the leather is darkened there. Again, it's just kind of looking at what you have. And remember, this will dry a lot. This particular stuff dries probably 1 or 2 shades later. Okay, so we'll come back to this in a bit and we can see what it looks like, because that'll pretty much be it. All right, so it's been a little bit. It's mostly dry. So I thought I'd show you sort of the end results here. I had to really play with the lights to get this to sort of so you could see it, so it could be a fairly accurate indication of what the colors look like, because the glare is just a little beastly. And that's just sort of from the polishing. It's got a slight sheen to it, but you can see that there's lots of little surface imperfections. Now if we get up real super close, and you can see how we've, like, let's look at that edge, right? See how we've added all those little details, and it really adds the authenticity of the design that we're going for, the look that we're going for. We want this to look rough. We want this to look like a piece of leather that's been harvested from someplace. And as with anything, you know, you can, less is oftentimes more, so you don't have to apply all those techniques to what you're doing. You can go much lighter and then just maybe even continue to add some in a layering effect. Plus, through use, it'll actually get some more marks on it too. So I hope this has been helpful. So the next step, of course, will be to make the belts and assemble the belts. But for right now, this component is done, and so I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please ask. Just understand it's important to make sure that your dyes are compatible if you're going to be mixing them. But sometimes it's good if you have like an alcohol-based versus a water-based. Even though they play okay together, they're going to definitely have a different effect. So your dye, you please try it on something first, just to make sure. It's always good to practice these techniques anyway on something that doesn't matter. The great thing about post-apocalyptic type stuff is it doesn't matter as much. But hopefully this has been helpful, and make cool shit. Thanks. So we got everything dyed now. It's really come alive. I mean, dye is one of those parts where you you do get that reaction fairly quickly as to seeing the outcome, the seeing that as results, and you really start to see how all that hard work you've done has come together. Uh, I often find that once you're the cutting and the processing and even the distressing, you don't really notice it until you apply that dye, which we just did. So you kind of get to feel that. And of course, we start to assemble those components in the final assembly, the final episode. And we'll also have a slight diversion as we talk about the belt itself and how the two belt components and the processing of those. But those kind of echo what we've already done. So as going forward, make cool shit.